I was standing at my own kitchen sink when my daughter's husband reached past me and turned off the stove. Just reached over, like I was part of the furniture. "That's enough," he said casually. "Gas isn't free. You don't need to cook right now." The soup was still bubbling. Carrots, onions, chicken bones I'd been simmering since early morning. The kind of soup you don't rush, because when you're older, time is the one thing you still try to control. I stared at the cold burner. Then I looked at him. Arms crossed. Confident. Comfortable. My daughter stood in the doorway, holding her phone with both hands, eyes glued to the screen like it could protect her from what was happening in front of her. I waited. Not for an apology. Not for permission. I waited for my daughter to say my name. She didn't. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Clarity. I turned off the tap, dried my hands slowly, folded the towel, and placed it neatly on the counter. Without saying a word, I walked to my bedroom. Behind me, I heard him laugh softly. The laugh of someone who thinks he has already won. I closed the door gently. Inside my room, everything was exactly where I'd left it. The same dresser, the same small mirror, the same wooden chair by the window where I drank my tea every afternoon at 4. I sat down. For the first time in years, I didn't feel old. I felt awake. People think power comes from yelling, or threats, or money. But real power comes from knowing exactly what you're standing on. And I knew. Because that house, the one he thought he controlled, wasn't his. It was mine. I had bought it 32 years earlier with my late husband. I had paid the mortgage. I had signed the papers. I had never transferred ownership. After my husband passed, I let my daughter and her husband move in temporarily. That was 6 years ago. Temporary has a way of growing teeth if you don't keep checking it. I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser and pulled out a slim folder wrapped in twine. Inside were documents most people forget exist until it's too late. The deed. The tax records. The insurance policy. My name alone. I traced the letters slowly with my finger, the way you do when you want to remind yourself something is real. From the living room, the television volume increased. He was celebrating already. I stood up, grabbed my purse, slipped my keys inside, and left the room. As I walked past the kitchen, my daughter finally looked up. "Mom," she said softly. I paused. "Yes. Where are you going?" I looked at her. Really looked. She looked tired. Smaller than she used to. Like someone who had learned to make herself invisible to survive. "I'm going to have dinner," I said calmly. "I'll be back later." Her mouth opened, then closed. Her husband didn't even glance at me. The front door closed behind me with a soft, final click. Outside, the air felt different. Cooler. Honest. I walked 2 blocks to the small cafe on the corner, the one I'd stopped visiting because he said it was a waste of money. I ordered soup. The irony didn't escape me. As I ate, I thought about the first time he moved in. How polite he'd been. How helpful. Carrying boxes. Calling me mom too quickly. Predators don't arrive snarling. They arrive smiling. That night, I checked into a modest hotel downtown. The receptionist smiled at me like I mattered. I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, I woke early, showered, and put on a simple blue dress. The one I wore to important appointments. At 8 sharp, I walked into the office of a man I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. He looked up from his desk and smiled in recognition. "Well," he said, standing. "If it isn't the woman who taught me to read contracts properly." "Good morning, Samuel," I said. "I need your help." He gestured for me to sit. "What's happened?" I didn't dramatize it. I didn't cry. I told him exactly what had been said. Exactly what had been done. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "They don't have a lease?" he asked. "No." "No rent?" "No." "And the house is fully in your name?" "Yes." He nodded. "Then legally," he said, "they're guests who've overstayed." I smiled faintly. "I want them gone." He didn't hesitate. "I'll prepare the notice today." By noon, everything was in motion. By 2, a courier was on his way. By evening, I was sitting in the hotel lounge, sipping tea, when my phone vibrated. It was my daughter. Mom, she said, voice shaking. There's a man at the door. He has papers. I closed my eyes. Did you read them? I asked. Yes, she whispered. 30 days. Mom, what is this? It's a timeline, I said gently. One you should have asked for years ago. Her husband's voice erupted in the background. This is insane. She can't do this. Tell her to come home right now. I held the phone away from my ear. Tell him, I said calmly, that I'll communicate through my lawyer. I hung up. The silence afterward felt clean. That night, I ordered room service and ate slowly, without rushing, without apologizing. The next morning, my bank confirmed what I already knew. Every utility account, every subscription, every insurance payment was in my name. I made a few calls. Not to punish, to correct. By noon, the house had no premium cable. By 1, the secondary credit card linked to my account was frozen. By 3, my phone buzzed nonstop. I didn't answer. Power doesn't announce itself. It simply stops responding. When I finally returned to the house 3 days later, I didn't knock. I opened the door. The living room was chaos. Boxes half-packed. Voices raised. Accusations flying. My daughter froze when she saw me. Her husband stepped forward. You think you can just destroy our lives? He snapped. I set my purse down slowly. I think, I said evenly, that you mistook my kindness for permission. He laughed bitterly. You need us. I looked him directly in the eyes. No, I said. You needed me. The room went silent. My daughter's hands trembled. That was the first crack. And cracks, once they appear, never close again. I walked to the window and opened it, letting fresh air flood the room. For 6 years, I continued. I shrank myself so you could feel large. That arrangement has ended. He scoffed. You're old, he said. You'll regret this. I turned back to him. I regret waiting this long. That night, my daughter packed a bag. She didn't tell him where she was going. She hugged me quietly in the hallway. I didn't know how to stop it, she whispered. I know, I said. That's why I did. And as the door closed behind her, I realized something important. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. And this was only the beginning. I watched my daughter walk down the driveway with her bag hanging off one shoulder, moving like someone who hadn't decided yet whether she was escaping or failing. Her husband didn't follow her. He stood in the doorway, jaw tight, eyes burning holes into my back. You think you've won, he said. I didn't turn around. No, I replied calmly. I think you've been exposed. The door slammed behind him hard enough to rattle the glass. I didn't flinch. That night, the house felt different. Louder in some rooms, strangely quiet in others. As if the walls themselves were trying to remember who they belonged to. I made myself tea and sat in the small sitting room near the window, the one I'd stopped using because he said the chair made the place look old. I sat in it anyway. My phone buzzed. A message from my daughter. I'm at a friend's place. I'm safe. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. Good. I slept with my bedroom door locked for the first time in years, not because I was afraid, but because I could. In the morning, I woke early, made toast, and read the newspaper at the kitchen table. He came down late, dragging his feet, eyes bloodshot, shirt wrinkled. You really cut off the internet? He asked, voice low. Yes, I said, buttering my toast. I have meetings, calls, a job. You have a phone, I replied, and a cafe down the street. He scoffed. This is abuse. I looked up at him. No, I said. This is separation. He stood there, waiting for something. A reaction. Fear. Tears. I gave him none. That afternoon, my lawyer called. He's been sending emails, Samuel said, threatening legal action. And, I asked, and he has no ground to stand on. I smiled. Good. 2 days later, he stopped speaking to me entirely. Silence can be loud when someone uses noise as a weapon. He began inviting people over. Friends I didn't recognize. Loud laughter. Music late at night. I documented everything. Dates.
times.
Noise complaints. Not because I wanted drama. Because I wanted precision. On the fifth night, I heard raised voices. Then something shattered. A glass. I called my lawyer. File an amendment, I said. Add hostile behavior. The notice changed from 30 days to 14. That's when panic arrived. He cornered me in the hallway the next morning. You're serious, he said, eyes darting. You're actually doing this? Yes. You'd throw family out on the street? I'm returning my home to its owner, I said. What you do after is your responsibility. He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. You're not who I thought you were. I met his gaze. No, I said. I'm who you hoped I wasn't. That afternoon, my daughter came back.
Not to stay. To talk.
She sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug, eyes red. He says you've changed, she whispered. I have, I said gently. I stopped disappearing. She swallowed. He says you're trying to control us. I shook my head. I stopped letting myself be controlled. She stared into her tea for a long moment. I didn't know how bad it was, she admitted. Not until I left. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Awareness hurts, I said, but it heals. She nodded slowly. He wants me to come back, she said. He says he needs me. I looked at her carefully. Does he need you? I asked. Or does he need someone to absorb his failures? Her shoulders sagged. She didn't answer. 2 days later, a moving truck appeared in the driveway. Not for him.
For me.
I packed only what mattered. Photographs. Documents. The green chair he hated. I wasn't leaving forever. I was reminding the house of my absence. He watched from the doorway as they carried my things out. You're bluffing, he said. I turned to him. No, I replied. I'm resetting the board. I moved into a small furnished apartment across town. Quiet.
Clean.
Temporary. Every night, my phone buzzed with messages. Anger. Bargaining.
Threats.
Then apologies. I didn't respond. On the 10th day, my daughter called. He's losing it, she said. He's blaming everyone. Even me. I listened. Then I said, good. She inhaled sharply. Good, she repeated. Yes, I said. Because now he has nothing left to hide behind. On day 14, the final notice was served. He called me screaming. You ruined everything. I held the phone steady. No, I said softly. You did. I just stopped covering for you. I hung up. On day 15, he was gone. The house was quiet. Empty.
Mine.
I returned that evening. The silence wasn't lonely. It was respectful. I opened all the windows and let the air wash through the rooms. I sat in the green chair, turned on the lamp, and smiled. The volume of my life was finally set by me. And I wasn't done yet. The first night alone in the house, I slept with every window open. Not because it was warm, but because I wanted the air to move through rooms that had held too much breath for too long. In the morning, I woke before sunrise and lay still listening. No footsteps pacing the hallway. No slammed doors. No television blaring over my thoughts. Just the soft ticking of the kitchen clock and the distant sound of birds arguing over something unimportant. I made coffee and drank it slowly at the table, exactly where I wanted to sit. By 9, my daughter arrived. She didn't use her key. She rang the bell. That alone told me everything. I opened the door and stepped aside. Come in, I said. She hesitated for half a second, then crossed the threshold like someone entering a new country. The house looked the same, but it felt different. She noticed it immediately. It's quiet, she said. Yes, I replied. Quiet doesn't mean empty. She walked into the living room and stopped in front of the green chair. You kept it, she said softly. I never planned to lose it, I said. I just stopped defending it. She sat on the edge of the sofa, hands folded, eyes scanning the walls like she expected something to jump out. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. You don't need to, I said. You only need to know what doesn't happen again. She nodded, lips pressed together.
He's been calling, she said.
From different numbers. I raised an eyebrow. Have you answered?
No.
Good, I said. Silence is information. She exhaled, shoulders dropping. I feel guilty, she whispered. That's normal, I said. Guilt is what shows up when you stop accepting what you were trained to tolerate. She looked at me then, really looked like she was trying to understand where this version of me had been hiding. You're different, she said. No, I replied. I'm visible. That afternoon, I changed the locks. Not out of fear. Out of completion. When the locksmith handed me the new keys, I felt their weight settle into my palm. Ownership has a sound. It's the quiet click of something closing the way it should. Over the next week, I cleaned. Not obsessively. Intentionally. I washed the curtains, scrubbed the corners, threw out things no one remembered buying. I removed the extra chair he always used to spread himself out. Space returned to the room. I repainted one wall a warm, pale color that made the light softer. The house began to exhale. My daughter started coming by in the evenings. Always calling first. Always leaving before it got late. We talked about ordinary things at first. Work. Weather. Neighbors. Then one night she said it. I don't think I ever felt like an adult, she admitted. Not with him. I didn't interrupt. He decided everything, she continued. Where we went. What we bought. How much we spent. And when things went wrong, it was always because I wasn't supportive enough. She swallowed. I thought that was marriage. I set my cup down carefully. That was management, I said. Not partnership. She nodded slowly, like the words were settling into a place that had been sore for years. He told me you were weak, she said quietly. Too soft. Too emotional. I smiled faintly. People who benefit from your silence will always call you weak when you speak. She stared at the floor for a long time. I'm scared, she admitted. Of what? Of being alone. I reached across the table and took her hand. Being alone is quiet, I said. Being erased is loud. Choose your silence carefully. She squeezed my hand. 2 weeks later, I hosted dinner. Nothing elaborate. Just soup.
Bread.
A pie cooling on the counter. I invited neighbors I'd nodded to for years, but never really known. They arrived curious, carrying small gifts, glancing around like they were seeing the house for the first time. And maybe they were. At the table, conversation flowed easily. Someone laughed too loud. Someone spilled water and apologized. No one raised their voice. No one took up more space than they needed. After they left, I stood in the kitchen alone and felt something warm spread through my chest. This was what a home sounded like. The following month, my daughter signed a lease. A small apartment near her work. She showed me photos, nervous, hopeful. It's not big, she said quickly. It's yours, I replied. That makes it big enough. She smiled, really smiled for the first time in a long while. On moving day, I helped her carry boxes up 2 flights of stairs. She laughed when I insisted on lifting one. You don't have to prove anything, she teased. I know, I said. I just want to. That night, I returned to my quiet house and made myself dinner. I ate at the table, lights low, music soft. I didn't rush. No one was waiting for me to finish. No one was monitoring my choices. Time stretched in a way that felt generous. A week later, a letter arrived. From him. Apologies written in uneven handwriting. Promises to change. Blame disguised as regret. I read it once. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not to keep. To remember. My daughter never responded to his messages. Eventually they stopped. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were moments of doubt. Lonely evenings. Questions without answers. But there was also peace. And peace, I learned, doesn't need constant explanation. One afternoon, I stood in the kitchen stirring soup. The flame burned steady. No one reached over to turn it off. I smiled to myself. Some victories don't announce themselves. They simply remain. And that was enough. The house settled into a rhythm that belonged to me. Morning light through the kitchen window, slow and pale. Afternoon shadows stretching across the floor just as I liked them. Evenings that arrived without tension, without anyone bracing for impact. I began to notice things I hadn't noticed in years. The way the floor creaked near the hallway. The way the wind pushed against the back door before a storm. The quiet satisfaction of finishing a task and leaving it finished. One afternoon, I found an old notebook tucked behind the recipe books. My handwriting from years ago filled the pages. Lists, numbers, notes about repairs, expenses, small victories. I sat at the table and read through it slowly. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped writing things down. When you live around someone who dismisses you, you start believing your record doesn't matter. That night, I bought a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote the date. Nothing else. Just the date. The next morning, I wrote again. Not complaints. Not regrets. Observations. The sound of rain at dawn. The taste of strong coffee. The relief of choosing my own pace. It became a quiet ritual. Writing things down felt like claiming them. My daughter started doing the same. She told me one evening, sitting at the table with her notebook open between us. I didn't realize how much of my life I forgot, she said, because I was always adjusting to him. I nodded. When you shrink yourself, I said, your memories shrink too. She tapped her pen thoughtfully. I don't want to forget again. You won't, I said. You're paying attention now. Weeks passed. The season shifted. Leaves turned and fell, collecting along the edge of the driveway. I raked them myself, slow and steady. A neighbor stopped to chat, surprised to see me outside. You look lighter, she said. I feel quieter, I replied. She smiled like she understood. One morning, my daughter called early. Not frantic, not scared, just tired. I had a dream about him, she said. I woke up shaking. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened. In the dream, he kept asking me why I left, she continued. And I couldn't answer. Dreams lag behind truth, I said gently. They catch up eventually. She breathed slowly, on the other end of the line. I don't miss him, she admitted. I miss who I thought I was with him. That's grief, I said. And it passes. She was quiet for a moment. Do you ever feel guilty? She asked. I considered the question carefully. I feel responsible, I said. For my choices, not for his behavior. She exhaled. I'm trying to learn the difference. You will? I said. You already are. That afternoon, I rearranged the living room. I moved the furniture closer together, creating space instead of dominance. The green chair returned to its place, near the window. I sat in it with my notebook and wrote until my hand grew tired. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't documenting survival. I was documenting living. A month later, a mutual acquaintance mentioned him in passing. He's having a hard time, she said carefully. He says you and your daughter abandoned him. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply nodded. People tell the story that allows them to sleep. That isn't my responsibility anymore. That evening, my daughter came by with takeout and a tired smile. I negotiated my salary today, she said. I raised an eyebrow. And I asked for more, she said, almost surprised. And they said yes. I smiled wide. Of course they did. She laughed. I heard your voice in my head, she admitted. Speak once. Clearly. I lifted my cup in a small toast. To clarity, I said. We ate together at the table, talking about nothing important. And everything. Later, after she left, I stood in the doorway and watched her walk to her car.
She didn't rush.
She didn't look back. She walked like someone who knew where she was going, even if she hadn't named it yet. I closed the door and locked it. Not out of fear, out of peace. Before bed, I wrote one final line in my notebook. I am allowed to take up space. I underlined it once. Then I turned off the light and let the house hold me. The first real test came quietly, not with shouting or threats, but with a request that sounded reasonable if you didn't listen too closely. My daughter called one afternoon, her voice careful, measured.
He wants to talk, she said.
Just once. I didn't answer immediately. Outside, A bird landed on the fence and tilted its head, as if waiting. About what? I asked. He says he's changed, she replied. He says he understands now. I closed my eyes. Understanding that arrives only after consequences is not understanding. It's damage control. You don't owe him conversation, I said gently. But if you choose to speak, you choose the rules. She was quiet. What rules? She asked. You decide the place.
You decide the time.
You decide when it ends, I said. And the moment he raises his voice or blames you, you leave. No explanations. She exhaled slowly. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You already left, I said. That was the hard part. They met in a public cafe, mid-afternoon, tables close together, witnesses everywhere. She told me later that he arrived early, already tense, already rehearsed. He talked fast, too fast. He apologized for being stressed, for being misunderstood, for being pushed. He said words like pressure and responsibility and sacrifice. He did not say control. He did not say fear. He did not say I hurt you. When she stood to leave after 20 minutes, he panicked. You're just like your mother, he snapped. That was when she smiled, small and steady.
Thank you, she said.
That means I'm leaving on time. She walked out. He didn't follow. That night, she came to my house and sat on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, knees pulled to her chest. I felt it, she said. The pull. The old confusion. I sat beside her, our shoulders touching. And? I asked. And it passed, she said quietly. It passed. We stayed there for a long time not talking. Sometimes healing doesn't look like progress. It looks like waiting without running. The next week, I received a letter from the bank confirming something I'd requested months earlier. All accounts fully separated. No secondary access. No shared permissions. Paper has a way of making boundaries real. I filed the letter neatly. That same day, I hosted tea again. 3 women this time. All around my age. All with the same careful posture. They talked about sons who needed help, daughters who were struggling, grandchildren who required sacrifices. I listened. Then I asked one question. Who lives in your house? They blinked. One laughed nervously. Well, technically me, she said. But nothing, I said. Technically is legally. Everything else is habit. We talked about documents.
Deeds.
Wills. Powers of attorney. Not fearfully.
Practically.
When they left, one of them squeezed my hand. I wish I'd learned this earlier, she said. So do I replied. But earlier doesn't exist. Only now does. Later that evening, my daughter stayed for dinner. She cooked. I watched. She moved carefully at first, asking where things were, waiting for permission. Halfway through, she stopped. I don't have to ask, do I? She said. No, I replied. You're a guest, not a child. She smiled and continued. The food wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. After dinner, we sat in the living room. She glanced at the green chair. You know, she said, I used to think that chair was just furniture. I chuckled. It's never just furniture, I said. It's territory. She nodded. He always avoided it, she said slowly. Like he knew. Bullies recognize boundaries instinctively. They just test whether you'll defend them. Weeks turned into months. Life softened. My daughter's voice changed when she spoke. Lower. Steadier. She started making plans without checking first. I started leaving the house without explaining. One afternoon, she called me laughing. I said no today, she said. To what? To overtime I didn't want. To a favor that wasn't mine to give. To explaining myself. I smiled into the phone. How did it feel? Strange, she admitted. Then clean. That night, I stood in the hallway and looked at the family photos. I removed one. Not angrily. Just intentionally. Some memories are lessons, not decorations. I placed it in a box and labeled it clearly. Past. The house felt lighter again. A few days later, an unexpected knock came at the door. I looked through the window first. Old habits don't vanish overnight. It was him. Standing alone. No anger this time. Just exhaustion. I opened the door only as wide as necessary. Yes, I asked. I just wanted to say, he began, voice hoarse, that I was wrong. I waited. He swallowed. I lost everything, he said. And I didn't understand until it was gone. I studied his face. I believe you understand now, I said calmly. But understanding doesn't reverse consequences. I'm not asking to come back, he said quickly. I just needed you to know. I nodded. I know, I said. He stood there a moment longer, searching for something. I didn't offer it. Finally, he turned and walked away. I closed the door gently and leaned against it, breathing evenly. No triumph, no pity, just closure. That night, I wrote in my notebook, not every apology deserves a response. Some exist only to ease the person who caused the harm. I slept well. In the morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor. I made soup again. The flame stayed on. I stirred slowly. The house was quiet, not because someone had been silenced, but because no one was fighting to be heard. And I understood something clearly then. Boundaries don't harden you. They reveal you. The months that followed didn't arrive with fireworks. They arrived quietly, with ordinary mornings, with unremarkable afternoons, with evenings that didn't require recovery. And that, I learned, was the point. Healing doesn't crash into your life. It settles into it. I stopped marking time by what had been taken from me and started noticing what remained. My hands still worked. My mind was still sharp. My house still stood. And more importantly, my voice still answered when I called it. One afternoon, I stood in the doorway of the kitchen watching sunlight crawl slowly across the counter. I noticed how my body no longer braced when someone entered the room. No tightening. No calculation. No preparation. Peace had entered so gradually that I hadn't noticed the exact moment it stayed. That's how you know it's real. My daughter came by that evening with a small plant wrapped in brown paper.
For the windowsill, she said.
I took it from her carefully. What kind is it? I asked. She shrugged. Something hard to kill. I smiled. Good choice. She watched me place it near the sink, where the light was strongest. You know, she said, leaning against the counter, I used to think strength looked loud. I turned to her. And now I think it looks like this, she said, gesturing vaguely at the room. Quiet, stable, unapologetic. I nodded. That's because real strength doesn't need witnesses, I said. She was silent for a moment. Do you ever feel angry? She asked. About what he did? About what you put up with? I considered the question honestly. Sometimes, I said. But anger is a visitor, not a landlord. I don't let it move in. She smiled softly. I'm still learning that. You will, I said. You're already practicing. Later that night, after she left, I sat alone with my notebook. The pages were no longer blank or tentative. They were full. Observations, thoughts, decisions, proof. I realized something then that surprised me. I wasn't writing to remember anymore. I was writing to witness. My life no longer needed translation. It was happening in a language I understood. A few weeks later, I received an invitation. A community meeting, neighborhood planning, small things. I almost declined out of habit. Then I stopped myself. I went. I sat in the second row and listened. When someone spoke over me, I raised my hand again and waited. When my turn came, I spoke once.
Clearly.
The room listened. Afterward, a woman approached me. You speak like someone who knows where she stands, she said. I smiled. That's because I stopped standing where I was placed. That night, I cooked for myself again. Soup, of course. I tasted it carefully. Adjusted the seasoning. Not because someone else would complain. Because I could. The house continued to change, subtly. I hung different curtains. Rearranged shelves. Removed things that no longer made sense. Every choice was small. Together, they were enormous. My daughter started coming by less frequently. Not out of distance. Out of independence. When she did come, she brought stories instead of worries. I booked a trip, she said one evening, almost disbelieving. Just me. Where? I asked. Somewhere quiet, she replied. I realized I like quiet. I nodded. Quiet tells you the truth, I said. She hesitated. I don't think I ever thanked you, she said. Not properly. You don't need to, I replied. Live well. That's enough. She hugged me anyway. Longer than usual. Some nights were still heavy. Memory doesn't vanish just because you evict it. But when those nights came, I didn't spiral. I sat with them. Let them pass. Grief, I learned, behaves when you acknowledge it. One morning, I found myself laughing out loud at something small. Burnt toast. The absurdity of it. The sound startled me. It had been a while. I stood there smiling, toast in hand, realizing how much of my life had been lived without sound. Not anymore. Months later, I ran into him once. By accident. At the grocery store. Our carts paused at the same aisle. He looked older. Smaller. Time had caught up with him faster than it had with me. He nodded stiffly. I nodded back. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Closure isn't a conversation. It's the absence of urgency. I finished my shopping and walked out into the afternoon sun. The world felt open. Not limitless. Just open enough. That evening, I sat in the green chair with my notebook. I flipped back to the first pages. The early entries were careful. Sparse. Like someone unsure whether she was allowed to exist fully on paper. The later pages were confident. Unfiltered. Alive. I turned to a fresh page and wrote. I am no longer explaining myself. I closed the notebook and rested my hands on it. For the first time, I didn't feel like my life was something that had happened to me. It was something I was actively living. The house settled around me, familiar and steady. I realized then that this wasn't the end of the story. It was the end of endurance. And the beginning of choice. I turned off the lamp and let the room go dark. Not because I was done, but because I was at peace enough to rest. And in that quiet, own darkness, I knew something with absolute certainty. No one would ever reach over and turn off my flame again.